The silent doorway, the old wooden door, creaked softly as Sandra Bullock stood before it, her hand hesitating over the bell. It had been years since she last walked up this path, the same quiet street where laughter once echoed, where coffee cups once clinked, where Keanu Reeves used to wait on the porch every Sunday morning. Now the house looked lonely. No curtains moved, no music played, only the sound of the wind brushing through dry leaves. She took a slow breath. There had been rumors that Keanu had stopped seeing people, that he lived in silence after losing someone dear again. Friends said he still smiled in interviews, but his eyes didn't. And deep down, Sandra knew that was true because she had seen those eyes long before fame, back when both were just dreamers trying to survive in Hollywood, back when kindness was all they had. As she reached for the bell, she remembered the last message he sent months ago, a simple line: "Sandy, if one day you ever find silence too heavy, come home." She hadn't replied. She thought he meant it as poetry, but today she finally understood he wasn't asking her to talk. He was asking her to listen. The door opened without a sound. It was unlocked. Inside, everything smelled of old wood and rain. There were sketches on the wall, motorcycles, sunsets, small handwritten notes that looked like unfinished letters. The air felt both peaceful and heavy, like a song that forgot its ending. "Keanu," she called gently. No answer. She walked through the hallway, her footsteps soft. On the table sat a single coffee cup, half full, still warm. Her heart trembled. Maybe he had just been here, maybe he still was. Then she heard it, faint piano keys coming from the back room, slow, uncertain, like someone playing from memory. She followed the sound, her chest tightening with every note. The door was half open. Through the gap, she saw him. Keanu sat by the old upright piano, hair longer than before, eyes closed, head slightly bowed. Sunlight fell across his face, painting a quiet glow. His fingers moved gently, but not perfectly. Each note trembled, as if afraid to be heard. For a long time, she didn't move. The sight alone broke her heart in silence. She realized he wasn't just playing, he was remembering. Finally, he spoke, still without looking up. "I knew you'd come, Sandy, someday." She froze. "How did you know?" He smiled faintly, eyes still on the keys. "Because I never locked the door." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask what had happened, but something told her that silence was the right language for now. So she walked closer and sat beside him. Together they listened, to the music, to the rain, to the spaces between words. After a while, Keanu stopped playing and turned slightly toward her. "You remember this song?" She nodded. "We used to hum it on set," she whispered. "Yeah," he said softly, "back when everything was simple. Before time started taking people away." His words sank deep. She knew he meant his family, his losses, his friends, but also something else. The quiet distance between them that had grown over years of different lives, different paths, same hearts. Then he looked at her for the first time. His eyes were gentle but tired. "You look like sunlight after a long night," he said with a faint smile. She laughed, tears filling her eyes. "And you look like the night that finally learned how to rest." That moment, small, fragile, almost nothing, became everything. The first smile she'd seen on his face in years appeared slowly, shyly, like hope returning after exile. As the rain grew louder, they talked. About nothing and everything, how the world had changed, how fame was both a blessing and a cage, how kindness still mattered even when nobody noticed. Every word was soft, as if the house itself was listening. Then, just as she was about to ask how he had been truly living, she noticed a photo on the shelf, a young boy, maybe 12, holding a small dog. Keanu followed her gaze. "That's Liam," he said quietly. "Your godson?" she asked. He nodded. "He's gone now." The air fell still. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. The pain in his voice said it all. And yet beneath that pain there was something else, something gentle, almost peaceful. "I started writing letters to him," Keanu said after a moment. "Every morning. I don't send them anywhere. I just leave them around the house. Maybe one day someone will find them and feel a little less alone." Sandra's eyes glistened. She looked around. Now those papers on the wall made sense. They weren't random notes. They were his quiet conversations with someone he could no longer see. She touched one. It said, "Kindness is the only language Liam still hears, so I keep speaking it." A tear slipped down her cheek. Keanu didn't wipe it. He just reached out, took her hand gently, and said, "Don't cry, Sandy, not today. Today's the first day my house doesn't feel empty." Her lips trembled into a small smile. "Because I came," he shook his head softly, "because I remembered how to smile again." For the first time in a long while, they both laughed, quiet, broken, real. Outside, the rain softened. Sunlight found its way through the window, touching the piano keys like a blessing. And in that small, ordinary room, something extraordinary happened. Two hearts that had been wandering alone for years found their way home again. Sandra looked around one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "This house isn't empty, Keanu, it's just been waiting," he nodded slowly. "And now it can breathe again." The piano sat silent, but the moment played on a song without sound, a memory reborn, a heart finally smiling after too many lonely seasons. The letters that never left the morning after Sandra's visit began with soft sunlight spilling through the windows of Keanu's house. The piano, still open from the night before, caught the light and reflected it gently onto the wall where dozens of papers fluttered. The room felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because someone finally had. Sandra woke up on the couch with a light blanket draped over her shoulders. She didn't remember falling asleep. She only remembered Keanu sitting by the window last night, telling stories about Liam and about the quiet strength it takes to live with grief without letting it turn into bitterness. The smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen. She smiled faintly. The house no longer smelled like loneliness. It smelled like life. She walked in quietly and found Keanu pouring coffee into two mugs. He looked calm, almost peaceful, though his eyes still carried that unspoken ache. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned with a small smile. "It's been a while since anyone said that in this house." She smiled back, accepting the mug he handed her. It was warm, comforting. For a few moments they stood in silence, sipping coffee. The birds outside sang faintly, as if even they could sense the shift inside. Finally, Sandra looked at the pile of letters stacked neatly on the corner of the table. "These are the letters you wrote to Liam?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "Yeah, I write one every day. It started as therapy, I guess, but then it became a promise." "A promise?" She tilted her head. He sat down slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the stack. "After he passed, I kept hearing his voice in my head. He used to tell me, 'Don't stop being kind just because the world isn't.' So I promised him I wouldn't, even if no one's watching." Sandra's chest tightened. "You kept your promise." He gave a small, sad smile. "Most days, but some days I forget. Some days I just stare at the piano and wait for the silence to end." "That's why you stopped going out?" He looked at her with a soft sigh. "It's not that I didn't want to. I just couldn't find a reason to. Everything outside felt loud, fast, artificial, and I didn't want to pretend to smile anymore." She nodded quietly. She understood that feeling too well, the weight of fame, the masks, the noise. Both of them had lived long enough under cameras to know that silence sometimes feels like the only safe place left. But this silence was different. It was healing now, not haunting. After breakfast, Sandra wandered through the rooms, looking at the small pieces of Keanu's life that few people ever saw, old movie scripts with notes in the margins, dusty guitar cases. Photographs of people she'd never met but could tell meant everything to him. Every item told a story of a man who loved deeply, lost painfully, and yet somehow kept finding beauty in small things. On the kitchen wall hung a faded picture of a beach. At the back of it, in neat handwriting, were words that made her pause. "If you ever lose your way, follow the kindness." She turned to Keanu, who was standing by the door. "Who wrote that?" He smiled faintly. "Liam." It was his last message before he went on that trip. I didn't understand it then. But now every time someone knocks on this door, I feel like he's reminding me that kindness still finds me, one way or another. The emotion in his voice made her throat tighten. She wanted to hug him, but something in his stillness told her to wait. Keanu didn't need comfort, he needed connection. "Keanu," she said softly, "do you ever think he's still listening?" He looked up, thoughtful. "I don't think he ever stopped. I just stopped talking loud enough for him to hear." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then let's talk louder." He looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "Let's take these letters," she said, gesturing to the stack. "Let's share them. Maybe someone out there needs to hear what Liam taught you. Maybe someone lost their way, too." For a long moment, he didn't respond. His eyes moved between her and the letters. His expression shifted from doubt to hesitation, then to something softer, trust. "You really think anyone would care about these?" She nodded firmly. "Not everyone listens to big speeches. Sometimes the quietest words save the most broken hearts." He leaned back, the sunlight catching his face. "You always knew how to say the right thing." "No," she said, smiling faintly. "You just forgot how much the world needs your voice." A slow silence followed, not heavy but thoughtful. He picked up one letter, unfolded it, and began to read aloud. "Dear Liam, today I met an old man on the street who dropped his groceries. I helped him pick them up and he said, 'Thank you, son.' For a moment, I felt you smiling. Maybe you're teaching me that life doesn't end where kindness begins. His voice trembled slightly at the end. Sandra blinked away tears, whispering, "That's beautiful." He smiled, shy and gentle. "It's just the truth." For the next hour, they went through the letters together. Some were short, some long, some written on napkins, some on notebook pages. Each one carried a piece of Keanu's soul, the moments of quiet kindness, the unseen gestures, the memories that never made headlines but built who he was. And somewhere between the lines, Sandra felt her own heart healing too. It reminded her of all the times she'd hidden behind her work, avoiding pain instead of facing it. Now in that quiet living room with a man who had learned to speak through silence, she found courage to breathe again. As the day turned to afternoon, Keanu looked at her and said softly, "Maybe this is what Liam meant by follow the kindness. Maybe it doesn't mean to search for it, maybe it means to become it." She nodded, her voice low but certain. "And maybe it's time the world heard it again." Keanu smiled for the second time in 2 days. It wasn't wide or loud, but it reached his eyes, that kind of smile that says the soul has started remembering how to live. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, as if the world itself was listening. What neither of them knew then was that these quiet letters would soon touch people far beyond that small house, and that one of them hid a truth that would change everything. The letter that shouldn't have been found the afternoon light faded slowly, as Sandra and Keanu sat surrounded by open envelopes, crumpled pages, and a silence that felt softer than before. The house was alive again, filled with stories that once belonged only to the walls. But among all those letters, there was one envelope that neither of them had opened yet. An old one, sealed, slightly torn at the edge, its paper yellowed by time. Keanu noticed it first. It was tucked between two books near the piano, almost hidden. The words on the front were faint but still readable, "For when you finally forgive yourself." His fingers froze around it. Sandra looked at him, concern rising in her eyes. "You wrote that?" she asked. Keanu shook his head slowly. "No, this isn't my handwriting." The air around them changed. Even the ticking clock seemed to grow louder. Sandra gently took the envelope from his hand, turning it over carefully. There was no date, no sender, just that one line. "Maybe Liam," she said quietly. He hesitated. "He never sent me letters. He was just a kid. I used to write to him." "Maybe he left you this one," she whispered. Keanu swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He didn't open it right away. He just sat there staring at the words, his hand trembling slightly. The house, once filled with warmth, now felt heavy again, as if the past had suddenly walked back in. Finally, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the handwriting that was unmistakably Liam's, uneven, rushed, but full of heart. "Dear Keanu, if you're reading this, it means you've stopped smiling. Please don't. I know life hurts, but remember what you told me, pain doesn't mean we stop being kind. It means we start being honest. You once said the world needs gentle souls more than perfect ones. Maybe that's why I looked up to you. When I'm gone, promise me you'll still build something that helps people breathe again. Don't hide in silence forever. Your little friend, Liam." Keanu's voice cracked as he reached the end. The letter slipped from his fingers and fell onto the floor. Sandra bent down, picked it up gently, and placed it on the piano. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew you'd lock yourself away." Keanu's hands covered his face. For a few seconds, no sound came out, only quiet breathing, the kind that trembles between grief and relief. "He was just a kid," he said softly. "How could he understand so much?" "Because you taught him," she replied. "You gave him that wisdom, and now he's giving it back." He looked up, his eyes glassy, searching hers as if trying to find air. "You really think he meant this for now?" She nodded. "I think he knew you'd need it one day, and maybe he sent me here to remind you." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Keanu reached for the piano keys and began to play the same melody from the night before, but this time, it sounded different. The notes carried warmth, not sorrow. It was as if Liam's words had lifted something off his chest. As the tune filled the house, Sandra closed her eyes. She remembered the days on set when Keanu would play softly between takes, lost in thought, and she'd tease him about writing a song for their film. But this was different. This was a song that came from pain, healed by love. After the melody faded, Keanu looked at her quietly. "You said yesterday that maybe we should share the letters. Now I think. Maybe this one should be the first." Sandra smiled through her tears. "It will touch hearts. People need this kind of truth." He nodded slowly. "But I don't want it to be about me. It should be about Liam, about how one small soul can leave behind something bigger than fame." "Then let's do it together," she said gently. He looked at her, eyes soft. You'd really help me, she smiled. I didn't come here to visit, Keanu. I came here to stay until you start smiling for real. He exhaled deeply, the kind of breath you take when your heart starts learning to live again. That night, they stayed up talking about how to share Liam's letters. Keanu suggested turning them into a small online project. Not a charity, not a campaign, just a quiet space where people could share kindness stories anonymously. No fame, no names, just simple truth. Sandra agreed. She even came up with a name, Letters That Heal. Keanu laughed softly. That's perfect. Liam would have loved that. By midnight, the first draft of the website layout was drawn on a piece of paper. Simple, humble, just like Liam's words. But as they worked, Sandra noticed a box under the table sealed with tape. "What's that?" she asked. Keanu glanced at it, hesitation flickering across his face. Old scripts, photos. Things I couldn't look at anymore. "Can I see?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. She pulled the box closer, opened it carefully, and froze. Inside were more letters, different from the ones to Liam. Each one had a different name: Mom, Dad, Jen, Emilia. Some names were crossed out, others faded. "These aren't to Liam," she said softly. Keanu's voice lowered. "No, they're to people I never got to say goodbye to." He reached for one and unfolded it. It was a letter to his late girlfriend, Jennifer. As he read, Sandra could see the pain etched across his face. "I tried to live quietly like you asked, but the silence started sounding like guilt. I still see your smile every time I close my eyes, and I wonder if I ever deserved that kind of love." His voice broke. Sandra placed her hand on his arm. "You did deserve it," she whispered. "You always did." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then quietly, Keanu said, "Maybe these letters shouldn't just heal others. Maybe they're meant to heal me too." Sandra smiled softly. "And they will, because you're not writing to the past anymore, you're writing to tomorrow." He looked at her, eyes shining with gratitude. "You always had a way of making me believe again." "No," she said, smiling through her tears. "You just needed someone to remind you who you are." As the night grew deeper, they pinned Liam's letter on the wall above the piano. Keanu whispered, "For when I finally forgive myself." And for the first time in years, he meant it. Outside, the rain returned, not heavy but gentle, like a whisper from somewhere far away. Neither of them noticed that one of the old letters, the one marked Emilia, had slipped under the couch, its corner peeking out just enough to catch the flicker of the fireplace. Inside that letter was something neither of them expected, a truth that would soon test everything they had just begun to rebuild. The letter beneath the silence the next morning began with soft sunlight stretching across the wooden floor, touching the papers scattered from the night before. Sandra was still half asleep on the couch, her head resting against a pillow, when she heard the gentle clinking of mugs in the kitchen. The smell of coffee once again filled the air, that same warmth that slowly replaced years of stillness. Keanu stood by the counter, quietly humming the tune he had played last night. It was almost unnoticeable, a soft, unfinished melody that carried the feeling of peace returning. He seemed lighter, calmer. Sandra smiled to herself, watching him from across the room. "You're up early," she said softly. He turned, smiling faintly. "Habit. I like watching the sunlight hit the piano. It feels like the house is breathing again." "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yesterday, you looked like someone who found his way home." He nodded gently, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe home isn't a place, Sandy. Maybe it's a person who still believes you can smile again." Her heart tightened at his words. There was something so simple, so raw about the way he said it, as if he wasn't just thanking her but forgiving himself. They had breakfast quietly, exchanging soft smiles, small jokes, pieces of old memories that felt like fragile treasures. After breakfast, Keanu went to clean up the living room while Sandra began gathering the rest of the letters to organize them for their project, Letters That Heal. She stacked envelopes carefully, sorting by date when her hand brushed something beneath the couch. It felt like paper, a folded corner slightly burnt at the edge. She reached down and pulled it out, an envelope, aged, slightly torn. Written in black ink were the words for Emilia, unfinished truth. "Keanu," she called gently. He turned, the sound of his name catching him off guard. When his eyes fell on the envelope, his body froze. The color in his face shifted. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "Under the couch," she said softly. "It was almost hidden." He walked over slowly, every step heavy. His hands trembled as he took the letter, staring at the name. "Emilia," he murmured, almost to himself. "I haven't heard that name in years." Sandra waited quietly, giving him space. "Who was she?" He took a deep breath before speaking. "She was Liam's mother." Her eyes widened slightly. "Liam's mother," he nodded. "Yeah, we were close once before." before everything fell apart. He didn't open the letter immediately. Instead, he sat down, the weight of old memories returning like shadows through sunlight. After a long silence, he said quietly, "She blamed me for what happened to Liam." Sandra sat beside him, her voice calm and gentle. "What really happened, Keanu?" He hesitated, the words stuck between pain and memory. Finally, he began. "We were working on a charity project, a road trip to deliver supplies to small towns. Liam insisted on joining, even though the weather was turning bad. I told him no, but he wouldn't listen. He said he wanted to prove he could help too. He was only 12. Keanu's eyes darkened with guilt. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. The car lost control. He didn't make it. And Emilia, she couldn't forgive me. She said if I hadn't encouraged him to follow kindness, he'd still be alive." Sandra listened, her eyes glistening. "You were trying to teach him love, not loss." He shook his head. "I was trying to teach him courage, but maybe I taught him recklessness." He looked at the letter again. "I never opened this." "I couldn't. Maybe it's time," she said softly. He nodded faintly. His fingers slowly tore open the seal. Inside was a single page written in trembling handwriting, Emilia's words. "Keanu, I have hated you for so long that I forgot how to breathe without it. I blamed you for the storm, for his choices, for the silence that followed. But deep down, I know you didn't send him into danger, you sent him into purpose. Liam believed in kindness because of you. I see it now in the letters you sent him. I found one hidden in his backpack. It said, 'Kindness is not a path, it's the light we carry when all paths end.'" He underlined those words. "Maybe that's why he went. Maybe that's why I need to forgive you, because Liam followed your light. Emilia." When Keanu finished reading, he couldn't move. His eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. Sandra's hand found his, holding it tightly. "She forgave you," she whispered. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "After all these years, I thought I was the reason her heart broke." "You were the reason her son learned to love," she said softly. "There's a difference." He looked at her, the sunlight catching his tears. "I didn't know she ever wrote this. Maybe if I had found it earlier, things would have been different." "No," she said gently. "You found it now when your heart was finally ready to hear it." They sat in silence, letting the moment settle between them. Keanu placed the letter beside Liam's on the piano, side by side, two voices that had finally found peace in the same room. "You know," Sandra whispered, "these letters, they're not just stories anymore. They're proof that even pain can heal when it's spoken with love." He nodded slowly. "And maybe that's what we were meant to do, turn silence into healing." As the day went on, they began typing out the letters for the website. Each word felt like a piece of their own hearts being stitched together again. They decided to start with Liam's letter, followed by Emilia's, a message of forgiveness and connection across time. By evening, the website was almost ready. Simple layout, plain background, no ads, no headlines, just a quiet space for people to read and share stories that could heal. But just as they prepared to upload the first letter, a soft knock echoed at the door. Keanu looked at Sandra, puzzled. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she frowned. "Maybe a neighbor." He walked to the door and opened it slowly. On the porch stood a woman in her 50s holding a small folder. Her eyes were tired but kind. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm sorry to come unannounced. My name is Claire. I'm Emilia's sister." Keanu froze, Sandra's breath caught. The woman smiled sadly. "She asked me to give you something, but she passed away before I could deliver it." From her folder, she pulled out a small, sealed envelope, one that looked exactly like the others on the piano. It read, "For Keanu and the one who helps him find peace." Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance, confused, emotional, and deeply moved. "How could she have known?" Sandra whispered. Keanu looked down at the letter, his hands trembling again. "I don't know," he said softly, "but somehow, I think Liam did." The woman placed the letter gently in his hand, whispered, "Thank you for being the light he followed," and walked away. Keanu stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the letter that now carried both names, his and Sandra's. "Looks like the story isn't over yet," Sandra said quietly. He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting both wonder and fear. "No," he whispered, "it's just beginning." The letter that carried both names, the evening air was calm, but inside Keanu's house, the silence carried a new weight, the kind that feels sacred, like the pause between two heartbeats. The envelope rested on the piano, the ink slightly faded but still clear. "For Keanu and the one who helps him find peace." Sandra sat on the couch, her eyes fixed on it. She felt her heart beat slow, not from fear but from something deeper, a quiet knowing that this letter held something neither of them were ready for, yet both needed. Keanu stood by the window, the fading sunlight tracing soft lines across his face. His fingers tapped restlessly against the glass. "You think we should open it now?" she asked softly. He turned, his eyes thoughtful. "Part of me wants to wait, part of me is afraid of what it might say." "You've faced harder truths than words on a page," she said gently. "And you're not alone this time." He nodded slowly. The words seemed to reach him in a place that had long been silent. With a steadying breath, he picked up the letter. The paper felt fragile, almost warm, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. He tore it open carefully, the seal giving way with a faint sound that echoed in the quiet room. Inside were 2 pages, one in Amelia's handwriting, and another written in a different, smaller hand. Keanu frowned, realizing it wasn't hers. He unfolded the first page. Amelia's words were calm, measured, filled with emotion that time hadn't erased. "Keanu, if you are reading this, I have already gone. I left this letter with my sister, hoping she would find the right moment to deliver it. I spent many years angry at the world, angry at you, angry at myself. But time softens even the sharpest grief. I began to see that Liam's journey wasn't an ending, it was a bridge. I believe he sent you someone to walk that bridge with you. If she is beside you now, it means my faith was right. She is your peace, the one who reminds you that forgiveness is not forgetting, it's remembering without pain. Share this with her." Keanu stopped reading, his voice trembling slightly. His eyes lifted toward Sandra, who was sitting silently, her hands clasped together. She gave him a soft nod, urging him to go on. He unfolded the second page. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, almost childlike. And when he began to read it, both of them froze. "Dear Keanu and Miss Sandra, hi, it's me, Liam. I wrote this with Mom before our trip. She said we might never send it, but I wanted to write anyway. Thank you for being my favorite grown-ups. Keanu, you always said kindness keeps the world spinning. I hope you keep saying that even when you're sad. And Miss Sandra, I hope you keep smiling for people who forget how. If you ever meet each other again someday, please tell everyone that love doesn't end when people do. It just changes houses." Sandra covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Keanu stared at the paper, unable to speak. The room felt still, sacred, filled with the presence of something larger than both of them, something like peace finally finding its way home. "He mentioned you," Keanu whispered, his voice breaking. "He knew your name." Sandra nodded, trying to steady her breath. "That means Amelia wrote this with him before you lost them both. Maybe. Maybe she already believed we'd meet one day." He lowered the letter slowly. "How could she have known that?" "Maybe she didn't," she said softly. "Maybe Liam did." For a long time, neither spoke. They just sat there, letting the words breathe between them. Finally, Keanu said quietly, "You remember what he wrote? Love doesn't end. It just changes houses." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe that's what all of this has been, love changing houses until it found its way back here." He looked at her, his expression softening. "You think that's why you came that day?" "No," she whispered. "I think that's why your door was never locked." His chest rose and fell slowly, the weight of years lifting off him. He folded both letters carefully and placed them back in the envelope. Then, almost without thinking, he placed it on the piano beside the others. "We should add this one to the project," she said quietly. "No," he said, shaking his head. "This one's not for the world. This one's for us to remind us that kindness finds its way even across time." Sandra smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then let's keep it safe. Maybe one day when someone else loses their light, we'll show them how it came back." He looked at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time in years, laughed, not the polite laugh from interviews or award stages, but a real, deep human laugh. The kind that sounds like life returning. "What?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "You," he said with a grin. "You came here with coffee and chaos, and somehow you turned my house into hope." She chuckled softly. "Well, someone had to clean the dust off your piano and your soul." They laughed together until the heaviness melted into warmth. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and quiet renewal. As night fell, they set up a camera on the piano. Keanu adjusted it carefully, then looked at Sandra. "You ready?" "For what?" she smiled. "For the first video of letters that heal." Her eyes widened slightly. "You want to start tonight?" He nodded. "Liam wouldn't want us to wait. Maybe someone out there needs this right now." She nodded back. "Okay, let's do it." The recording light blinked on. Keanu sat beside the piano, the letters spread gently in front of him. Sandra sat beside him, her hand resting quietly on the keys. He spoke softly to the camera. "Sometimes the world gives you silence so you can hear what kindness really sounds like. These letters, they aren't about loss. They're about remembering love in its quietest form." Sandra added, her voice trembling but strong. And if you're watching this, remember, no matter how far you've gone from kindness, it always knows how to find you again. The recording ended with a faint smile between them, two people who had finally stopped running from their own hearts. Later that night, after uploading the video, they sat outside under the stars, the sky clear and peaceful. The video title read simply, "Letter 1 for anyone who forgot how to smile." Keanu leaned back, looking at the sky. "You think Liam would have liked it?" Sandra nodded. "I think he's smiling right now." He closed his eyes, the corners of his lips lifting. "Then so am I." Neither noticed that within hours, the video began spreading quietly, messages pouring in from strangers around the world, thanking them for reminding humanity of something simple. That kindness never dies, it only waits to be remembered. But among the comments was one that stood out. It said, "You don't know me, but I knew Liam. I have something he wanted you to see." Sandra turned the laptop toward Keanu, their eyes locking in disbelief. The story wasn't over, not yet. The gift Liam left behind the morning light broke gently across the room, filtering through the curtains and resting on Keanu's face. He hadn't slept much. Neither had Sandra. The message from the stranger kept replaying in their minds. "You don't know me, but I knew Liam. I have something he wanted you to see." They sat at the kitchen table, two untouched cups of coffee between them. The air was thick with both curiosity and fear, fear that maybe this message would open old wounds or reveal something they weren't ready to face. "Should we reply?" Sandra finally asked. Keanu stared at the screen for a long moment before nodding slowly. "We've come this far, whatever it is, maybe it's the final piece." He typed a simple response. "Thank you for reaching out. Please tell us more." Minutes passed like hours. Then a new message appeared. "Liam volunteered at our community shelter before the accident. He helped us build a small room where children could read and paint. Before he left for that trip, he gave me a flash drive and said, 'Give this to Keanu when the time feels right.' I didn't know how to find you until your video." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "He left something for you." Keanu's hands trembled as he typed back, "Can we meet?" The stranger replied almost instantly, "Of course, I'm in Santa Monica. I can come today." By afternoon, a gentle knock echoed at the door. A woman in her late 30s stood outside, holding a small envelope and a flash drive in her hand. Her eyes were kind, the kind that had seen pain but chosen compassion anyway. "You must be Keanu," she said softly. "And you're Sandra. I saw your video. Liam would have loved it." Keanu took the envelope gently. "Thank you for coming." The woman smiled faintly. "I didn't know if this was still important after all these years. But Liam believed you'd need it one day." She handed him the flash drive. Written on a small label in a child's handwriting were 3 words, "For future kindness." The woman left quietly, leaving them alone again in the stillness. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a long look, the kind that needed no words. They walked to the study and plugged the drive into the computer. A single file appeared. It was a video dated 2 weeks before the accident. Keanu's hand hovered over the mouse before clicking play. The screen flickered, and then Liam's young face appeared, smiling, alive, and full of that same light Keanu remembered. "Hi, Keanu." Liam's voice rang through the room, bright and innocent. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye, but don't be sad, okay? I just wanted you to know. You changed my life." Keanu froze, his throat tightening as Sandra's hand found his. "You told me once that kindness is like a seed," Liam continued. "You plant it and you never know where it will grow, so I made something for you. It's not big, but it's my dream. I built a small space at the shelter. I called it the Kindness Room. It's for kids who feel invisible like I used to. They can come there to draw, write, or just talk. I told them it's yours. That one day you'd visit and make it bigger." Tears streamed down Keanu's face. Liam laughed shyly on the screen. "You said love doesn't end, it just changes houses, so I guess mine just moved into that room. Don't forget to visit, okay? And please keep being kind even when it hurts." The video ended with Liam waving at the camera, his small hand covering the lens. For a long time, there was only silence. Not the heavy kind, the sacred kind, the kind that follows truth. Sandra wiped her eyes, whispering, "He left you a purpose." Keanu nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "No, he left us one." That afternoon, they drove to the shelter in Santa Monica. The building was simple, painted white with murals of children's drawings covering the walls. An older volunteer recognized Keanu instantly and led them to a small room at the back. On the door, faded but still visible, were the words written in colorful crayon. "The Kindness Room for anyone who needs a little light." Inside, the walls were covered in art. Handprints of children, small notes of gratitude, pictures of laughter and love. One wall caught Sandra's eye, dozens of letters pinned up under a wooden sign that read "Letters that Heal." Her breath caught. "Keanu! Look!" He walked closer, reading the messages, some from children, some from strangers, all carrying words of hope. "They kept writing to him," he whispered. "They turned it into something real." A young boy entered the room holding a paper flower. "Are you Mr. Keanu?" he asked shyly. Keanu knelt down, smiling softly. "Yeah, I am." The boy handed him the paper flower. "My sister said Liam built this room. He helped her when she was sad. She said he learned kindness from you." Keanu took the flower gently, his eyes glistening. "Then your sister learned from the best teacher." Sandra knelt beside them, her voice warm. "And we'll make sure this place keeps growing, okay?" The boy nodded, smiling, and ran off. As they stood, Keanu looked around, at the drawings, the letters, the echoes of Liam's laughter hidden in every wall. It was as if the boy had never really left. His kindness had simply found new homes, just as he promised. Sandra whispered, "This is what he meant by for future kindness. It wasn't just for you, it was for everyone who'd ever need a reason to believe again." Keanu nodded, his voice low. "And now it's our turn to keep it alive." They spent the rest of the day talking to the shelter workers, learning how the kindness room began and how many lives it had touched. By sunset, Keanu quietly announced he would fund its expansion, more rooms, more letters, more hope. "No fame, no credits," he said softly. "Just light where it's needed." Sandra smiled through tears. Liam would be proud. As they walked outside, the golden light of evening wrapped around them. The air smelled of the ocean and rain, the same scent that had filled his empty house days ago. Only now that house wasn't empty anymore. Later that night back home, Keanu placed the flash drive on the piano beside the letters from Liam and Emilia. He lit a candle, its glow dancing across the pages. "You did it, kid," he whispered. "You turned pain into purpose." Sandra sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you turned silence into peace." He smiled softly, looking at her. "I couldn't have done it without you." She laughed quietly. "Maybe that's what Liam meant when he said love changes houses. Maybe it just moved into ours." They sat there in the quiet glow, surrounded by letters, music, and the memory of a boy whose kindness refused to die. Outside, the world went on, unaware that somewhere in a quiet home filled with letters and light, two people had finally found the peace they'd been searching for. Keanu closed his eyes, whispering one last time, "Thank you, Liam, for teaching me how to smile again." And as the candle flickered gently, the camera light blinked once, recording that final moment for the next Letters That Heal video. Its title read simply, "The Day My Heart Finally Smiled." And for millions who watched it, it wasn't just a story. It was a reminder that kindness, once shared, never truly ends.